Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. In today's video, we're doing some French country Easter decor. For my first project, I'm going to be using peat pots. I'm going to cut a little line there up the side and then through the center. And as you can see, I'm then pulling the sides of the pot together to make it a little bit narrower. Ultimately, what I want to create here is a cone shape. You can see I've done the same thing to the other pot sitting underneath it. And then I am going to start adding some glue to the inside of one of those peat pots that I have cut up there and then a little bit on the seam there. I didn't have a foam cone unfortunately, so I had to get a bit creative, and this is an option for you if you are in the same position. I just got these off Amazon. I will pop a link in the description. So as you can see, I am gluing and stacking the 3 peat pots together to create our cone shape. Once my glue had set, I then took some little eggs that I had in my craft stash and I started adding them to the side of our cone shape. Now these eggs are pretty little. You can probably get them on Amazon as well, or eBay, or any craft shop really at this time of year. And I'm just going to continue gluing those eggs around the cone in an even spaced out position. And once I have glued them all on, I'm going to take Paint Couture's Buttercream chalk paint and I'm going to go over the top of the entire piece. So over the egg, over the peat pots. You can see I'm adding that paint in a dabbing and stippling motion. That's going to hide some of the polystyrene texture. I'm then going to take Paint Couture's duck egg, and on every other egg I'm going to add 1 coat of this lovely blue tone. Again, I don't need this to look perfect because we are going to be layering some moss in between each of the eggs, so it's okay if I get some in other areas. When that's dry, I took light brown sugar antiquing glaze by Paint Couture. I put a little bit in a container and then I used my mister to water it down a little bit. I then went over the top of each of those eggs. This is going to give them a bit more of an antiqued look. Once I had all of the eggs covered, I then took a wet wipe and started dabbing off that product. Again, I want these to look almost like they're speckled on there, like they're aged. I then also took some of Paint Couture's pitch black chalk paint and I've just taken a little bit out, put some in a plastic container and watered it down. And now I'm going to create some speckles by just sort of tapping my brush over the top. And then once I am happy with that coverage, I am going to grab my wet wipe again. And again, just going to dab at that paint to tone it down and make it a bit more subtle. Once that paint was dry, I then took my hot glue gun and started adding some glue in between the eggs. I'm then going to start positioning some forest moss in between each of them, and I'm just going to work my way around my little cone shape there and continue adding that forest moss. You can get this at a few places, Amazon, eBay. There's a lot of different places you can get this. It just depends what look you're after. I feel like this would also look really lovely with Spanish moss as well. So as you can see, I'm just going to continue to add that glue until I have completely covered my little cone shape there with that moss. Next, I took a little mini bird's nest that I got on a craft website and I'm just pulling it apart. And I'm then going to pull it even more apart so I can get some strands of that grapevine style material. And I'm just going to start gluing that down. So I'm adding a little dab of glue, adding one end of that little grapevine material there. And then I'm going to curve it around the tree, almost like it's tinsel, but obviously this is an Easter project. And I'm loving the texture and the beautiful sort of woodland natural feel this brings to the piece. I'm going to repeat this a few times, just adding that little vine material in certain areas. If you're going to do this, it will be up to you how much you add. Next, I'm going to focus on the base. I thrifted this sweet little urn not long ago, and I'm going to prime it with Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in white. This is obviously quite a shiny surface, so I do need to get that primer down so that my paint will stick and stay there. Obviously, I do have a French country vision for this piece, so this urn is perfect. I'm then going to take Paint Couture's Buttercream and I'm going to go over the top of my 2 coats of dry primer, and it's going to take 2 coats of this Buttercream to get the coverage that I want. Once I finished painting the outside, I then added that buttercream to the inside. Even though I'm going to be gluing the little topiary on top, if I decide to change the use of this piece, I want the inside to be finished as well. Next, I'm going to take Light Brown Sugar Antiquing Glaze by Paint Couture, and I'm just adding that over the top of my dry buttercream paint. So I'm really working it into all of those details. And then once I'm happy with the coverage, I will come in with a wet wipe and pull back some of the excess. So this is definitely going to give us a vintage antiqued look. If I inspire you to try any of these Paint Couture products from today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. I will put it in the description and on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. I also added some of the glaze to the inside as well. Once my glaze was completely dry, I added some hot glue to the rim of the urn, and then I'm going to position our topiary on top. Finally, I added a chiffon ribbon to the base and tied a simple bow. And here's our finished Easter topiary tree. This was such a fun project and I love how it turned out. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my next project, I'm going to be using some more peat pots. I have 3 there, and I'm going to paint each of these with Paint Couture's Buttercream inside and out. When my paint was dry, I took some napkins that I got from TK Maxx and I'm going to peel off the additional layers on the back because we're going to be using this to decoupage with. I really want to have that sweet little bee in the center of my pot, so I'm going to tear out a square of that napkin that has that design on it, and then I also tore at the edges to give them a rough edge, as I feel that rough edges work a little bit better when you are joining pieces together. I'm then going to use Paint Couture's Decoupage Medium in matte. I'm laying down some product where I want my design to go, and then I'm going to lay my napkin over the top and start adding some product over the top of that and really working that into the design. I came to this point and realized that the little stripes on the side weren't really looking right. One of them looked a little bit wonky, so at this point I did then decide to tear off the design on the left there. And then I was able to reposition it a little bit straighter. I also then tore off and repositioned the stripe on the right. I did have to tear off a little bit of that excess napkin because it would have gone over the top of our little bee design. So I tore that off, and then when I repositioned it, I did notice that there was a little gap where you could see a bit more of the peat pot underneath than I wanted. So I just tore off a little bit of excess napkin from up the top there and layered that over the top. For the back portion of our pot, I just tore off some of the plain parts of the napkin, so we don't want any more stripes on the pot, and I just started adding that to the pot and almost sort of collaging in any gaps. And then I came in and started tearing off the excess from the base of our pot. I sealed those up with some more of our decoupage medium and repeated the same step for the top of the pot. Now we can move on to the other pots. I'm going to be using part of the napkin that we just used and Redesign's Easter stamp. I'm inking up one of the designs and I'm going to press it down on the napkin, and I'm going to be also picking another couple of designs from that same stamp and also adding them to the napkin. Basically, we're creating our own decoupage designs to use. You can't really stamp directly onto peat pots, you won't get a clear image. I then took my hairdryer and heat set each of our stamped designs. Next, I'm going to tear around the first image that we're going to use. I'm going to lay down some decoupage medium on my pot, and then I'm going to position our first little stamp design over the top, and I'm going to press down. I'm then going to take my brush and use that to smooth it down. You can see I've got a little bit of product on there to seal it all in, and then I'm going to repeat the same process for the other pot. Definitely keep this technique in mind for your future projects. You can also stamp over the top of tissue paper, and that way you can create your own decoupaged designs. While my pots are drying, I'm going to take a medium-sized egg and I'm going to apply some of my Buttercream chalk paint by Paint Couture. It's going to take 2 coats to get the coverage that I want. And then once that's dry, I'm going to lay down a layer of Paint Couture's decoupage medium in matte, and we're going to take that sweet little bunny that we stamped and we're going to add that to the egg. I'm just smoothing it down with my fingers, and then just like we did before, I'm going to take my brush with a little bit of product on it. I'm going to go over the top of that design to seal it all in. Next, I'm going to take some smaller eggs and I'm going to add some Buttercream chalk paint to each of those. These are going to go in our little pots. Once they are dry, I'm going to water down some of my light brown sugar antiquing glaze. I'm going to then use a fan brush, and I'm going to take that watered down glaze mixture and I'm going to do some speckles on our egg just by tapping over the top. I then also took some of our watered down glaze and I added it to each of the 2 pots that we added our stamped napkin to, and I am dabbing off some of the excess, but I'm not putting any of that glaze on our stamped image that we put on the napkins. I want there to almost be like a halo around it. I also then added some of that watered down glazed mixture to the little egg that we added our tissue paper design onto. And once I'd covered the entire thing, I also did a few little speckles on that as well. So that I don't have to use too much of my forest moss, I'm going to stuff some leftover napkins into the base of the pot. I'm then going to add some of my hot glue over the top of it, and then I'm going to start adding some of that forest moss into the pot. I then added some hot glue to the base of our little speckled eggs that we created earlier, and I'm just going to glue them in. I'm going to repeat the same process for our other design that we added the napkin piece to, and then I'm going to take another one of those little nests that I've been using that I got online. I'm just sort of pulling it apart to make it a bit wider. I'm going to add some hot glue to the forest moss in the center there and glue that down, and then I'm going to add some glue to the base of our decoupaged egg and glue that in. Next, I'm going to take my hot glue gun and I'm going to add a little bit of glue around the rim of my pot, and I'm going to start adding some twine. So I've just added that over the top of the glue. I'm going to wind it around the top a little, add a little bit more glue, and then add one more little bit of glue there just to hold it in place. And then I'm going to continue winding that twine around the top of the pot about 3 times, just using the glue that's already there to keep it in place. I then cut my twine and glued the end piece in place. I'll repeat the same process for each of the pots. Next, I'm going to create a bow. I'm going to wind some twine around 3 of my fingers about 5 or 6 times. I'm going to cut off the twine, leaving a little bit of length. I'm then going to wind that excess length around the center, trim off the excess, and glue it in place. This is just a simple little bow. I'm just going to glue that down so that it doesn't come apart. And then I'm going to add some glue to the back of the bow and glue it on our pot. I'll also add this to our other stamped design. For our pot with the bee napkin on it, I've just doubled over some twine. I'm going to make 2 loops, then pull those together and tie a knot. I'm then going to cut off the little loop down the bottom there so we have 2 tails the same, and then I'm going to glue that into position. And here are our finished pots. This was such a fun and easy project. Let me know if you had a favorite pot out of these 3 and what you think of these in the comments. For our third project today, I'm going to use some of Paint Couture's Buttercream on, yes, another peat pot, and I'm just going to coat the entire outside of this pot. I'm then going to be using a resin piece from the Redesign Easter Wreaths mold. You can see I've already cast it in resin. I'm going to heat it up with my hairdryer so that it becomes flexible. And then I'm going to take my hot glue gun and add some glue to the back of my resin piece. And just a reminder that this has been heated up, so don't try and bend it if you haven't. And then I'm going to press it up against that pot. I'm then going to add another coat of Paint Couture's Buttercream over the top of my resin casting, and I'm also then going to be adding it to the inside of the pot as well. When my paint's dry, I'm going to take some wood glue and I'm going to add a generous amount to the base. I'm then going to take some of my Plus air dry clay. This is just sort of a cheaper clay that I like to use on other projects, and I'm adding this to the inside because it's going to give the pot some stability and some weight. And it's also going to stabilize the stick that we're going to be using for the topiary. Next, I'm going to add some glue to the opening of a clear plastic ornament that I had in my stash, and then I'm going to take a foam egg and put that in the opening. Obviously, the stick that we're going to use for the topiary is too little to sit there and be stable, so the foam egg is going to hold that in place in the opening. I'm then going to start gluing some more of my little Easter eggs there to the outside of our clear ornament. I'm just trying to space them evenly, but also leave enough room for that forest moss that we're going to be adding a little bit later. I've used a plastic Christmas ornament as my base for my topiary, but obviously you could use a foam ball for this step instead. Once I have all of the foam eggs glued down, I then took some of Paint Couture's Buttercream and I went over the top of the eggs and also our plastic ornament. Now, I probably should have used a primer for this, but the chalk paint does a really good job of sticking to most surfaces. And also we're going to be using hot glue, and this is just a decor piece. When the Buttercream chalk paint is completely dry, I took light brown sugar antiquing glaze. I'm going to water that down, and then I'm going to start applying that over the top of the eggs. This is something that I've repeated quite a few times, but I just love the effect that it gives. Plus, watering it down does make your product go just a little bit further. Once I'm happy with the coverage of the glaze, I then took a wet wipe and dabbed back some of that excess. Once the glaze was dry, I took my hot glue gun and started adding glue in between each of the eggs, and then I started pushing down some forest moss. I definitely recommend that you have something to poke that moss down with. You don't want to burn yourself on the hot glue. I did that a few times before I learnt the lesson there, so definitely use something to poke your moss down with. Don't burn yourself, guys. I'm going to continue adding that glue around our ornament there until I have the entire surface covered with that moss. Once I finished adding the moss, I then took a little bird's nest, just like I did with the first project, and pulled that apart. And I'm just going to take a few little pieces of that vine material and glue that around our little topiary there. I then set the topiary off to one side, and I'm going to take Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze, and I'm going to paint over the top of the stick that we're going to use to hold up our topiary. Once I have an even coat on there, I then took a wet wipe and I'm going to spread it and sort of dab off that excess. I then made a small hole in the egg that we placed at the opening of the ornament, And then I added a little bit of hot glue to that hole, and then I grabbed the little stick that we had just stained and I've just popped that in there. And I do have some excess glue that I'm just going to then push some of my moss onto to hide any hints of that little egg. And then I'm going to poke another hole in the clay that we put in our base and add a little bit of wood glue, and then I'm going to push our wooden stick into that hole there. So obviously that clay is going to help stabilize. And then I'm going to add some hot glue. Sorry, it's a bit of a bad angle there, but I added some hot glue to the clay base, and then I put some of our forest moss over the top. I then took some more of that bird's nest that I took apart, added a little bit of glue to the top section of our topiary, and then I'm just going to wind that around our little stick to make it almost look like a vine. I added a bit more glue to the bottom to hold it in place. I then took some more Van Dyke brown glaze and I'm going to add it over the top of the casting that we have from the Redesign Easter wreaths mold. I'm just working that over the top of all the details and obviously over the top of our peat pot, and then I'm going to pull back some of that excess with a wet wipe, and I'm going to continue adding that around the base of our pot. Finally, I'm going to add a little bead of glue to the top of our pot so that I can glue down some twine. So just adding a little bit of glue there. I'm then pulling the twine around to the front and tying a knot. I then sort of laid it on its back a little bit to stabilize it, and then I tied a simple bow. I also then added another little bead of glue to hold the bow and the twine in place. And here's our finished topiary. This was such a fun project. It's hard to believe that the topiary there used to be a Christmas ornament. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. I really hope that you've enjoyed today's video and that it's inspired you to create some Easter decor using peat pots or maybe thrifted finds. Let me know if you had a favorite project from today. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find most of the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.